Namaskar, good morning. This talk is based...
Can you be a little louder?
Speaking.
Yeah.
This talk is based on a new scientific article that came out just about a month ago. A new proposal for how biological evolution can work in species. And I'm going to be comparing this new idea to Baba's philosophy to see which might be, how they can be related. One is scientific and one is philosophy, but there may be, and I'll let you be the judge about which one seems like a better explanation. But before we start, or we have started, the question is, did brains or minds come first in evolution? So just to get a rough idea, raise your hand if you think brains came first in evolution, the evolution of life. Did brains come first? Okay, one. How many think minds came first? Okay, most everyone else. Okay, let's see, okay? So the issue is evolution in biology, and in science that's dominated by the Darwinian theory of evolution, Charles Darwin, as it was developed up to the present time. Now it includes the idea of the evolution of genes and DNA, but it's based on the philosophy of materialism. There's only matter and energy involved in the processes of evolution. So in cosmic evolution in general, if you include the whole universe and how everything moved, the scientific issues are the origin and evolution of the universe, a big question, the nature of matter and energy, that's still being figured out because only 95% of the energy and mass of the universe is unexplained, only 5% is explained. There's dark matter and dark energy, people don't know what that is. The origin and evolution of life, it's still basically theories. The scientists talk about how abiogenesis, life evolved from chemicals, but that's a theory. And Darwin's theory of evolution is also a theory, although they say evolution is a fact, but the process of evolution is still not 100% agreed upon. The origin of life, relationship of minds and bodies. That's a big question in science today. It's a philosophical question and a scientific question. How does the brain relate to the mind? Evolution is talking about the evolution of physical things, but the mind, if we think there is a mind, and most of us do, but a lot of scientists don't, or they don't think it's more important than the brain. So that relationship needs to be figured out. And the science of consciousness, in the last 20 years, it has become a very large topic, because if scientists accept materialism as the basis of science, how do you get mind and conscious experience out of pure matter? Matter is, you can say, dead matter, pure matter. How do you get experiences of color, of form, of sound out of pure matter? And no one has the answer to that. Because one is conscious experience, and one is matter, which doesn't contain anything about sound or color or feeling. It's just, something, stuff, okay, called physical stuff. So how do those relate? And within that cosmic evolution, the evolution of life is what Darwinism is about. And the new theory I'm going to be talking about is a new aspect of Darwinism. Someone's just proposed it just about a little more than a month ago. It's still based on materialism, but it's giving a new, you can say, slant to the idea of evolution. So the title of the article, and I happened on it, you could say by chance, about a month ago. It had just come out, and it's been advertised all over the world. It's considered like a very new idea, maybe a good idea in science. It's called An Increase in Animal Diversity Was Facilitated by Ecologically Driven Brain Complexity through the Cambrian. What that's saying is that the Cambrian era is an era, historical era of evolution quite a long time ago, about 500 million years ago. And in that period, I'll say more about it in a second. This is Ariel Chipman, is the person who wrote this article. He's a professor of ecology evolution in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. The article was published in April 17, so 2026. Very new article. He's also the author of a textbook on organismic animal biology. So he knows, he's up to date on the latest ideas about evolution of organisms. Okay. Now, the title of the paper contains the Cambrian era. What interesting happened in the Cambrian era is about 8 or 10 groups, families of life developed in a relatively short period of time compared to the whole history of the Earth. The Cambrian, it's called the Cambrian explosion, a relatively rapid evolutionary event, roughly 540 million years ago, during which most of the major animal groups, okay, like there are different groups of, I'll mention 3 of them, they all appeared roughly in the same short interval of time, which if you think about it in terms of evolutionary terms is very surprising. How could that all happen by chance, that 8 different groups of animals evolved in a relatively short period of time with nothing before for the last 2 billion years before, and then all these groups occurred in one short period, and then a few more groups occurred after that. But this big explosion, and so it's people want to explain it, scientists want to explain it by Darwinian evolution, but they have a hard time because Darwinian evolution is assumed to take a long time to happen. So there's no scientific consensus, but what scientists say is it all happened as a cascade, okay, a sum of interconnected events. I'm just quoting Science magazine. The prevailing theory is that a combination of environmental changes, genetic innovations, and ecological feedback loops mutually reinforced each other to drive rapid diversification. And basically what that means is they don't know. They're throwing different terms out, like feedback, genetic innovations, environmental changes, but there's really no answer to the current question. You have to see, when you see jargon, you have to realize they don't really know. Okay. Here's a picture of what some of the animal and plant life looked like in the Cambrian era. Here's something, I don't know the names of these, but it's something that looks like it might have been related to an octopus. And it's got big bulging eyes, and there's 2 of them swimming around, and some other animals, and it's kind of bug-like animals. There's some plants growing as well. And this is in the sea, so it looks like they might be flying in the air, but this is all underwater. Okay, this was all of these groups evolved underwater. Okay, so let's call this an octopus-like animal with these 2 bulging eyes. Do you think that's just a machine moving around? Or does it look like it's something that's looking for food, looking for what to eat, what to avoid? Does it have a mind or not? That's kind of the question for biologists. Do you apply the term mind to animals like this? 500 million years ago. When does mind evolve in evolution, or does it ever? Some scientists think that the mind is just the activity of the brain, that there's no separate mind. Everything can be explained by the neural activity of the brain itself. And so they try to avoid using the term mind while talking about evolution. And you'll see how. So Ariel Chipman, he called informally, in his article, he called it his brain first hypothesis, okay? That long title he gave basically says that the brain evolves first in the development of organisms. It doesn't say it's first in the creation of life, but in the development of organisms over time. So the brain is evolving first, and then the other organs of the body kind of evolve a little bit later. So it's to explain the directional increase in complexity. Now he looked at 3 different groups, which were relatively developed, groups that already have a fairly developed brain and developed organs, but during the Cambrian period, these groups emerged and they also showed significant development within that time period. So he's thinking about their brains, they had brains, and their brains developed, and their other organ systems developed also. And so he's asking the question, what's the relationship of the development of the brain to the development of the other organs in these 3 groups, which are the arthropods. These are like, think of lobsters, think of crabs, invertebrates with jointed legs, segmented bodies, hard exoskeletons, okay? Think of lobster. Annelida, worms that, you look at them and their bodies are in different segments. They evolved in that period of time. And mollusks. Mollusks they don't always have shells, like clams have a shell made of calcium carbonate, but octopuses, octopi, are also mollusks. They don't have a shell, but they have the same other related features that other mollusks have, so they come into the mollusk category. These 3 groups, he's interested in how their brains evolved in relationship to the other organs of their bodies. So, in terms of factual evidence, in the Cambrian era, these 3 groups, their complexity does, increase. Okay, their nervous system increased, and the forward part of their brain, called the anterior part of their brain, increased in size. Okay, so it's part of their brain, it's sort of the forward part of their brain, but also other organ systems increased. Okay, and they can figure out some of these things from the shape of their shells that they find. They can figure out what's going on inside, because the brains themselves don't last in historical time, but you can see somehow the shapes of the brains from the shapes of the containers of the brains. So his hypothesis is that all of these structures were evolving, but he's proposing that the brain evolved before the others. And so why does he say that? He's an expert, and many other people study, what's called genetic regulatory toolkits. This is a group of genes that are in the brain, and they're also in other organ systems. But the interesting thing is, what they do is they help build the physical structure of organisms according to a body plan, okay? So because genes have a lot of ability to turn each other on and off, they can start building a body, and they know where to put the leg, and put another leg here, put the eyes here, and this here. All of this is controlled by the genes that are acting as controlling elements. They turn each other on and off, so that if something goes wrong, then a leg appears where an eye should be, something like that. And you get the wrong body plan. If all goes well, you get a nicely proportioned organism. So he's proposing that these genetic toolkits were in the brain first, but it turns out that, and they look at this, I guess, in modern organisms where they can measure them, they find the same set of regulatory genes is occurring, or almost the same, occurring in the other parts of the body. The things that help develop the brain also help develop the other parts of the body, even though the other parts of the body look quite different. They're using the genes that turn activities on and off. That toolkit is the same in other organisms, in other organs of the same body. So he uses the term that the toolkits were started out for brain development, and they were later, quote, co-opted, in other words, grabbed and used by the other organ systems, maybe slightly modified to develop the rest of the body. Okay, So for him, brain first means the brain was the first organ system to increase in complexity compared to the other organs. Okay, it's not saying that the brain developed the first thing when life was formed, because the first life was just single cells. Okay, like bacteria, amoebas, one cell, they don't have a brain, they don't have nerves, they're just a single cell. Nerves and brains developed much later, particularly in this Cambrian era. That's when a lot of the animals with brains developed. Okay, brain was the first organ system to increase in complexity. So it's a theory, it's a hypothesis. He hasn't proved it, but he's saying it's reasonable to think that the brain developed first. And then the question is, why does he think the brain developed first? And can anyone suggest why they think the brain might develop first as animals get more complex? Why should their brains develop first, as opposed to their stomachs or lungs? Why should the brains develop first? Yeah?
Well, is it organizing or it organizes?
Okay, what's it organizing? What's the main thing the brain organizes?
Well, itself and everything is connected to different functions.
Different functions, okay, but when there was no brain, how did animals see, for example? How do they respond? Somehow they could respond to light, and somehow they could move and run away or move towards and away without a brain. But according to Chipman, as the environment around these animals became complex, they couldn't just, with simple, like single cells, figure out what's going on. Who's the good guy and who's the bad guy? They had to, see more of their features to know more about them. It's that hot, cold was not sufficient to know what is to run away from and what to approach. So they needed a more developed sensory system. And with needing a more developed sensory system, the sensory system goes into the brain first. And so he proposed that the brain has to develop to deal with a more complicated ecological system around them. Yes?
I would say this will all be explained when we get into the Sarkarian.
Into the what?
Sarkarian model.
Yeah, Sarkarian's model will bring the mind in. This is the key idea, that the present theory doesn't mention the mind at all. Okay, and here are the key points in the brain first theory, and then we'll see what that looks like, and then how the Sarkarian theory can relate to that. I'm just quoting now about the need, because the environment is changing, they have to have a more complex brain to deal with that complicated environment. That's its idea. Organisms need to receive, process, and respond to an increased number of signals coming from different organisms and from different directions. So there's a lot going out there, and something, if they're going to live and thrive in that more complex environment with more predators and more possible prey also, they need to be able to figure out what's out there. And the sensory systems alone, cannot do that without further processing, and that's why he's thinking the brain evolved to deal with that more complex, ecological environment, which I suppose grew up because of all these other organisms were developing at the same time as well. It got crowded, and organisms, you could say, had a need to know what's out there so they could survive. And notice he uses the expression, organisms needed to receive, process, and respond to increased number of signals. So to say an organism needs to develop more processing, does it sound like it's talking about a desire? Does that sound mental? Or do you think he's using it in the same way that a car needs gas in order to run? We say, the car needs gas, fill up the tank. The car doesn't need the gas, but if you don't fill up the tank, the car is not going to run. A mechanical system, we can't really say it has needs in any subjective sense, but the way we use the word need can be just purely as an objective, what is required for it to function. Otherwise it'll die if it doesn't get what it requires to function. Okay. So this itself isn't implying mind. I would say it's not implying mind. To say it needs to receive increased number of signals, that's just, if it's to survive, that's what has to happen. Okay. Then evolution by natural selection of DNA and genetic toolkits. So that happens. Somehow these toolkits come together. A toolkit might contain 20, 30, 50 DNA strands that are, work together in a very intricate way in order to develop the brain, to develop the sensory systems, develop how things interconnect. It's not a simple thing. It might be hundreds of DNA molecules needed in one toolkit. Let's say even if it was 10, no one knows how a single DNA came to exist, much less 10 or 100. Because if you look at DNA, it contains hundreds of different of these chemical bases. They have to be in a particular order in order to make protein, amino acids, in order to build proteins. If the order isn't right, you just get nonsense or garbage in, garbage out. And no one has really answered that problem scientifically of how individual DNA, that's the right DNA for the job, comes into existence. They say, oh, it happened by chance. But if you look at the possible number of combinations to get it wrong, it's not even trillions, billions. You'd have to make choices for the whole length of the age of the universe to get maybe one right, not to mention 10 or 20. So that's still an unanswered question in biology, how DNA came to start from scratch from just simple chemicals.
Are you going to talk about what Baba's
Yes.
take on this is?
Yes, that's what's
Because
coming.
These guys,
Yeah.
they're fine, but I want to know what Baba thinks.
Yeah, so this is setting the scene. How does Baba answer these questions? Okay, so
I'm struck by how this scientific process, the sequential developmental process, mimics what's happening with organisms and DNA complexity. It's like their brains are.
well, the brains are getting more complex, but because of the DNA in the toolkit is what tells the brain to become more complex in a very specific way, in a specific order.
But the process which the scientists are going through, it's a replication, it's a matter of scale. The mechanics of the process of them trying to figure these things out just mimics what you're describing there.
Right. They're having clash and cohesion.
Yeah, they're trying to figure it out, and they've been working on this problem since 53, when some sparks in a test tube created a few amino acids from a mixture of inorganic chemicals, and they thought, wow, this is great. This is like we're almost starting life in a test tube. But they didn't know that amino acids are just the beginning. You have to put them in the right order to make the proteins that you want to make. Okay, but it was a start. Okay, what they're saying is if we keep at it, we're going to figure it out. Just give us time. Okay, that's the scientific slogan. Just give us more time.
Or we could.
Okay. So in these causal things, notice there's no mention of mind in this proposed evolutionary process. But the question then is, if we have minds, then you have to think, well, what about dogs? Do dogs have minds? Well, most people would say that they do. And cats, what about cows? It seems like, okay, what about monkeys? Probably so. What about fish, okay? What about insects? Do they have minds? Scientifically, there's no known way to say that mind begins at a certain level of development of an animal. Or even a plant. Do plants have minds? Some, plants catch insects. and digest them. And in terms of Baba's philosophy, plants have minds also. Okay. Well, and we're going to come to Baba's philosophy. There's uncertainty because they don't know what a mind is or what causes it. They leave mind out of their discussions of these particular, relatively simple organisms. Though Baba says that even single cell organisms, protozoa, bacteria, have minds. Everything that's living has a mind, according to Baba. Okay, that comes out of his philosophy. So now, Prabhat Sarkar's scientific approach to evolution. So for him, he starts with supreme consciousness, infinite supreme consciousness, okay, which, because it has the ability to qualify itself with its creative power, prakriti or shakti, it gives itself qualities to create a cosmic mind. Okay? The cosmic mind gives itself further qualities to create a universe, and the universe is existing within the cosmic mind, according to Baba's philosophy. So that what we call the physical universe is actually a projection of thought in the cosmic mind. But we call it physical because by definition, physical is what we know with our sense organs. If we see something with our touch it, feel it, we call that physical if we use our sense organs to detect it. But from a philosophical point of view, it all might be psychic. Just like our dreams, we see in objects in our dreams, but our dream is all part of our mind. And so the objects in our dreams are also mental, made from our minds. Okay, but so whether something is physical or not depends on whose philosophy system you're supporting. Okay, so the universe that produces cellular life, plants and animals, human beings, and those go back to the supreme consciousness. Human beings develop their minds through spiritual practices. Ultimately, their minds merge with the supreme consciousness, and that's moksha, salvation. Microvita, okay, first, clash and cohesion. Baba proposed that at every stage of the evolutionary process, including the original triangle of forces that are preceding the existence of cosmic mind, they're having clash among themselves. Clash and change and cohesion when some kind of new arrangement comes to exist. Clash and cohesion together are a fundamental evolutionary principle in Baba's philosophy, and it goes throughout the whole range of evolution. The evolution of matter by clash and cohesion. The evolution of the first life. There are interior forces, exterior forces involved in the cosmic cycle of creation, and those forces clash, and the result is an organism with a nucleus that's alive, and its vital energy, holds it together. Scientists don't like the idea of vital energy, so they don't talk about it or don't believe in it, but they can't explain what life is either. They think life is just a particular organization of physical matter, that it requires energy to keep it going, but they try to explain it purely in a physical way. Mind, Prabhat Sarkar says, also develops out of clash within matter. The simplest mind develops from clash within matter as well. So in his view, both life and mind develop out of matter from clash and then cohesion, and evolution also is further clash and cohesion for organisms to develop. He says nothing evolves, nothing develops without clash and cohesion. And I have a whole separate article which is footnoted in this talk, how all the different levels of the development of life involve clash and cohesion. Human beings, why did human beings separate from the tailless apes in the forests, which are very closely related to us? The apes, chimpanzees, orangutans, and gorillas, they're all called tailless apes, and we're also tailless if you think about it. But human beings got out of the trees and went into the plains, and they had more, Baba says, they had more clash and cohesion interacting with the physical world. They didn't stay in the safe trees, and because they didn't stay in the safe, their minds evolved more. And we became the human beings that we are because of the clash and cohesion that we experienced that apes and gorillas didn't experience in the forests. Okay, that's an example of clash and cohesion. It goes into societies as well. Societies evolve also through clash and cohesion. So it's a very broad principle. It's not just the same as like natural selection says survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest, if you think about it, and the evolution has been criticized, because that sounds like circular. The survival of the fittest, well, who survives? The fittest survive. So it's the survival of the survivors. Okay? It doesn't really say who's going to survive, and you can't use the evolution to predict who's going to survive. You just have to wait and see. And you say, oh, the giraffes with the long neck, they survived because they had the longer neck. But how they got that longer neck is not answered. Did it happen by chance, or was there some guided evolutionary process behind it? Well, in Sarkar's view, evolution is guided by the cosmic mind. And the DNA, the RNA of life, Baba said, well, he implied that his microvita theory, which he gave in 1986, microvita, these subatomic living entities created by the cosmic mind, he said they develop into viruses. And if they develop into viruses, we know that viruses contain DNA and RNA. So the cosmic mind can generate microvita that have, in a pre-planned way, just the organization of DNA or RNA that's needed to develop life, either to create life or to develop life in a pre-planned way. The cosmic mind is, with infinite intelligence, can figure it out and know what brains to create and to develop in which particular way. It's purely a mystery for science because of the improbabilities involved that these things would happen by chance. So clash and cohesion is the principle. Microvita is part of Baba's evolutionary plan. And tanmatras. Now, what are tanmatras? According to Baba's philosophy, which actually is derived from the first philosophy in India called Sankhya philosophy, that Sankhya philosophy has a lot of the terminology that's in Baba's philosophy. It has Purusha, but for Sankhya philosophy, Purusha means just individual consciousnesses. There's no supreme consciousness in Sankhya philosophy. But Prakriti, there's one Prakriti, so Prakriti is the boss. It's the creator of everything, and the Purushas are just watching it, okay, with their conscious watching. And out of Prakriti evolves the Mahatattva, Mahatattva, Aham Tattva, and Chitta. They didn't call it Chitta, they call it another word for mind. The same words are there. And Baba talks about 5 fundamental factors that compose the universe. Those 5 fundamental factors are also in Sankhya philosophy, but they are created by very subtle entities called tanmatras. Tanmatras are coming out of the ahang, the I, the doer portion of the mind. They don't use the word mind, the doer portion of those principles. The tanmatras come out first, 5 types of subtle entities which create the 5 fundamental physical factors: solid, liquid, luminous, aerial, and etheric. But what Baba says about tanmatras in Ananda Sutra is they're also emanated by these 5 fundamental factors. So every object, whether it's color or sound, is emanating these tanmatras as well. Tanmatras themselves are not color, but they are, Baba calls them sensory inferences. They contain the information to create color in minds. So when tanmatras get into your mind, then you see the color of the object. But the quality of a red object is contained in the red object. It's not created by the brain, but it's kind of encoded in tanmatras. They're subtle. The smallest piece of the bhutas is a tanmatra. So it encodes the sensory quality that is contained in the Tanmatra, and when that sensory quality gets into your visual system, goes into your nerves, the sensory nerves, it gets to a certain point, Baba says, in your sensory nerves called the appropriative point. Appropriate, okay? The appropriative point in the nerves is where the Tanmatras, carrying the sensory inferences, go from the brain to the mind. And in the mind, they vibrate the chitta, which is the mental plate of the mind. The vibrations of the chitta produced by, let's say, a red color allow the I-do portion of the mind to experience that color. Okay? So your I-do portion of your mind, when you feel I'm doing something, I'm talking, there's a part of your mind that's called the I-do part of your mind. It also sees, it also thinks, it also does the different activities. So something that's colored in the environment vibrates your chitta, and then you see it as that color or that object. And then your I-do is the part that sees it. And your mind also, in Baba's philosophy, is where does the consciousness come from? Consciousness is not the same as the mind. Okay? Consciousness, individual consciousness, comes from the supreme consciousness. The supreme consciousness has a relationship with each individual mind and actually physical object in the universe. And Baba says it reflects off of each individual mind, and the reflection of that cosmic consciousness or supreme consciousness off of the individual mind is called the individual consciousness. And that individual consciousness, or Jivatman, is what gives us the experience of I'm conscious of experiencing something. In other words, if there was no Jivatman, if there was no individual consciousness, your mind might be maybe to function, but it would be all happening sort of in the dark, you can say. And it would be functioning unconsciously. No one wouldn't be able to talk, it wouldn't be able, or maybe it would, but it wouldn't be conscious. Our experience of consciousness itself, awareness, comes from the consciousness that is reflected from the supreme consciousness onto our minds. And no materialistic theory has that in its description. And so that's why when they talk about can computers become conscious, you have to have a mind in order to reflect supreme consciousness off of to create an individual consciousness. And computers don't have chitta, they don't have a mental plate. It's purely physical. And although there may be some reflection of supreme consciousness off of a computer, it's only in potential form because the computer doesn't have a mind, and therefore it's not going to have awareness. And it's not likely to develop awareness unless it can develop a mental plate. Okay. So Tanmatras are also part of the evolution of mind, because Tantras are there even before matter. And then Tanmatras are involved in the perceptual process to give us the experience of consciousness itself, awareness itself. Yes?
So, I was thinking just now, for the visual Tanmatra, there's light, and
Yes.
red is a frequency of the visuals.
Not quite. There's a vibration of light, and that vibration is physical, and a certain number of vibrations per second. But every photon has an associated color, and the color that's associated with the photon is the Tanmatra of the photon. The Tanmatra is a purely psychic entity actually associated with the physical vibration of a photon. So that the psychic associated color is what gets into your mind and gets communicated to your chitta. So that's how you experience the color red of a photon. Baba said every vibration in the universe has associated those 5 sensory vibrations with it: sound, touch, form, taste, and smell. Okay, so you can't have a vibration in the universe without it having a sensory quality associated with it. This is you can say, it would be a revolutionary idea in science if scientists recognized that's the source of subjective qualities. They're associated with physical vibrations in the universe. Yes?
So what I was going to ask is there's a physical aspect, which is the light and its frequency, and then there's the mental aspect.
Yes, the mental aspect is what gives the quality that you experience in your awareness when you see the effect of that photon on your mind, and you see redness. Redness is not something that is scientific. It's a word, but there's no number that can describe what is red. And what I see as red, you might see as green, maybe. And there's no way to know if you're seeing green, I'm seeing red, but we're both calling it red because that's what we learned to call that sensation when we were little. So the way science developed since around the 16th century is that it only developed mathematically with things that you could measure objectively. And Galileo was the person who said, let's leave out all of these, subjective things. Let's say that they're all in the soul, okay? Soul and mind were pretty much considered the same thing. The physical things that could be measured, like size, shape, position, and velocity, let's put that into physics. We'll make mathematical physics, and we'll leave out all the subjective stuff. So today, everything in science doesn't have any subjectivity associated with it. And what they say, and the neurophysiologists say, is all of those subjective qualities are produced by the brain itself. And somehow that vibration of the brain is experienced subjectively as awareness. But that's saying that the brain is causing subjective awareness. But science was defined so that even the brain is purely physical matter. It's not going to create anything subjective because all the subjective qualities were removed before the science of physics was developed. And nerve cells are basically physics and biology, but biology is physics and chemistry. All of those are considered naturalistic, and they all exclude subjective experience. So tanmatras and how they relate to awareness, that's also part of the evolutionary process. Okay, so these three areas are all scientific approaches of P.R. Sarkar. The clash and cohesion, the microvita providing DNA and evolution, and tanmatras, which provide, along with the reflected consciousness, give us our experience of conscious awareness. Without that, we couldn't do anything. But science left it out. And now science is in trouble because they're realizing they can't supply subjective qualities from physical matter. And they call it the hard problem of consciousness. How to get subjective experience from pure matter, material matter. And no one's been able to, if you think about it, it's impossible because physical science was created by taking out all the subjective qualities and putting them aside. They were called secondary qualities. And they said they're not associated with the object, that somehow the brain will create them when you're experiencing. Okay, so where is this going? So in the steps of the causal factors associated with P.R. Sarkar's evolutionary process, starts out with the supreme consciousness. Then you get matter and energy. And here I've mentioned physical clash and cohesion in microvita. Then that creates the evolution of protozoic bodies and minds. Microvita and clash and cohesion of matter create the first life. And the expansion of minds, what is expansion of mind? According to Baba, the mind, the chitta, is actually within the brain cells. It's not outside of the mind. The mental plate that allows you to experience things, that chitta is within the nerve cells, and as the chitta gets more and more information, the mind expands, okay? Literally, the chitta expands in the nerve cells and puts pressure on the nerve cells. This is Baba's explanation. Pressure on the nerve cells, so the nerve cells have to expand too. They have to become stronger. They have to develop stronger nerves or more nerves, and that is what develops the brain. The expansion of mind develops the brain. Once you've got a bigger brain, you need a bigger case for the brain. the cranium is the part of the skull that surrounds the physical brain. That has to expand as well because the nerves, the brain has expanded. But the physical body, depending on where you are in the evolutionary process, the physical body can get smaller as the brain expands. Human beings, their bodies actually became smaller as they became smarter. Okay? That their bodies became stronger. The Neanderthals might have been not twice the size, but twice the weight. They actually had big brains as well. It turns out that they were very intelligent also, but they had to use most of their intelligence just to survive in the cold climate. And so they didn't have as much, you can say surviving is creativity also, but they didn't have this you can say what we call flexible higher intelligence. They did develop tools, they developed simple art, things like that, with a bigger brain, but most of their intelligence was just put into the survival mode. Okay, so all of these stages involve clash and cohesion, developing larger, stronger brain cells, then larger brains and body structures. Body structures might be smaller but more complex. Then more clash and cohesion, minds continue to expand in the evolution of plants, animals. Individual consciousness increases with perceptual evolutionary processes using tanmatras. Okay, so the mind is continually expanding, and reincarnation comes into the picture as well. When you have a cow or a dog or a monkey, it's gotten to the level that its mind, that can't exist in its present body. Its mind, Baba said, it'll jump into a human body in the next life. Those three, cows, dogs, and monkeys in particular, often get human bodies in the next. You can have animals jump from one stage to another, in evolutionary jumps. But part of Baba's evolutionary process includes the evolution of bodies as well as mind and reincarnation from one body to another. But reincarnation can also go backwards. If a human being doesn't pursue a subtle path and directs their mind towards physicality, their next life can be in a physical body. Okay, depending on what they focus their mind, that's what they get. They can get what do they call the Devayoni, a body that has only three fundamental factors. It doesn't have liquid and solid. And those Devayonis hang around the things that they were attracted to. They hang around money, they hang around music, if they were spending a lot of time with music, and focused on music that went beyond their interest in spirituality. Then they may get a body in their next life that just concentrates on music. But that's temporary. They'll get back into the evolutionary process later. So Baba's evolutionary philosophy is much subtler, you can see, than the materialist philosophy. And I'm just going to end with a summary of the diagram that shows how tanmatras work and the different levels of the mind in human beings. Now, the mind doesn't occur fully formed in the first cells. The clash and cohesion where matter forms the first living cells, those living cells only have the chitta stage, the mental plate, okay? So there's no sense of I exist, there's no sense of I do in an amoeba or a bacteria. But does that mean they're not conscious? What do you think? If there's no sense of I do and no sense of I exist, do you think that amoeba is conscious?
What do you mean by conscious?
Having awareness of feeling or something's out there.
Yes.
Okay.
It's the nerves.
Well, they don't have nerves. Amoeba doesn't have nerves, but it has a chitta.
Yeah.
The point is, it has a chitta, and chitta means it has the consciousness. The chitta itself doesn't produce the consciousness, but the chitta of an amoeba is also, there's reflected cosmic consciousness reflecting off of the amoeba gives the individual consciousness of the amoeba. And that individual consciousness gives conscious awareness to the chitta. So the amoeba may sense that something's hot or something's cold, and not only the sense, the feeling is fear. That kind of feeling is there. Baba says eating, sleeping, fear, and sex are very strong in single cellular entities. The urge to procreate is so strong that they just divide themselves. Baba says that's the strength of single cell entities. They just divide themselves. The sexual instinct becomes weaker later on, and it requires two instead of one. Okay, so amoebas really have a greater desire to procreate than we do in some sense. Okay, so here's a red flower. Here's a person looking at the red flower. The tanmatras are coming from the red flower, going into the eyes. Okay, the eye organs. Baba says the eye organ is not just the eyeball. It includes the nerves that are associated with the eyeball, and the nerves going into the brain are all part of those optic nerves are also part of the eye organ. And that particular point where tanmatras coming through those nerves meet the place where they transfer from the nerve, from the nerve to the mind, that appropriative point, Baba said, that's the real organ, not the eyeball. That's the gateway to the organ. The real organ is the place where the tanmatras transfer from the physical brain into the mind. Reflected or transmitted, Baba uses both terms. They get into the chitta, and from the chitta they form the chitta into a particular shape of the object that they're have viewed, and the eye experiences, looks at the shape of the object, experiences the color of the object, and so that's what's happening. So up here, this cloud above the brain, that's the mind, okay? So the mind is at a subtler level than the brain. Actually, the mind is physically inside the brain, but it's at a subtler vibration, you can say. So here I'm depicting it as at a higher level. It's above the chitta. That's where an image of the red flower occurs, and the I do is that's what's seeing the red flower, and the experience of I exist. That's the Mahatattva. You're feeling that just you exist. Your mind exists. That's not doing anything. It's just feeling its own existence. That's also a crucial part of the mind. I exist. I do, and the mental plate, or the chitta, is where all of the forms and shapes take place. Also, memories and things like that are all in the chitta. The chitta has the different levels of conscious, subconscious mind in it as well. So the chitta is actually quite complicated. And all of this, here's the individual. All of that is existing within the cosmic mind. The cosmic chitta is you can say, the cosmic mind's mental plate, where all the universe itself is existing in the cosmic mental plate. And the cosmic mental plate is observed by the cosmic I do. The cosmic mind has its own ego, its own sense of doership, which is to create universes and to keep track of everything going on in the universe and to intervene if necessary. It's not a passive observer. According to Baba's philosophy, the Supreme Consciousness can take physical form with its full capacity of Supreme Consciousness and reestablish Dharma in society. And that's what Krishna was doing, that's what Shiva was doing. Baba suggested several times that entity is this expression of the Supreme Consciousness, is the entity that people are singing Bhavanam Kevalam to. So it's indirectly Baba's suggesting that he was also that expression of 100% Supreme Consciousness in human form. So we still have to see the manifestation of what happens to society when all of Baba's, whatever he gave in his life is put into practice. So I hope that's been helpful to see where physical science stands in relationship to Baba's. These are all philosophical ideas now. Clash and cohesion, microvita, and tanmatras, they're all philosophy, but they all make sense, you can say, in a way and answer questions that physical science doesn't have answers to. Where does DNA come from? They don't know. Where does experience of consciousness come from? They can't explain it from a materialist point of view. And so sooner or later, materialistic science is going to realize they're not able to answer the really important questions that people want to know. What is consciousness? You know, what is awareness? What's the real origin of life? It couldn't have happened just by chance. So, questions? Yes.
So when you started talking about this, the guy who wrote an article.
Chipman.
And he said it was 500 million years ago?
Yeah. Let me go back.
You call that advanced Darwinism?
I called it Darwinism with a new idea attached to Darwinism, which would suggest the direction of development within Darwinism. So it's not.
But it's still not.
It's still Darwinism. It's still materialistic.
Right.
Okay, there's no separate mind associated with that. He left out mind. In his book, I looked up his book on Google, and it says he does mention fear as something that the mind can experience, and a sense of self. So in his book, he acknowledges that there is a sense of self, so maybe, but he might talk about mind at some higher level of development. But it's not something people talk about in science, because they don't know what science is. They don't know how matter, they don't know what the mind is. How does mind relate to matter? How does it communicate? They don't know. Baba's given this, you can say, the solution. Tanmatras allow the mind and the brain to communicate.
But they're never going to know, even by reading Baba's materials. They're never going to know unless they have the experience.
The experience or the experiments. I suggested that.
Experiments. So maybe you write to these guys.
Well, I've proposed an experiment that they can look at these appropriative points to see that, because those are the transition points from the brain to the mind. It should show up in the people's conscious experience if you block those appropriative points with, say, an anesthetic. They may lose their conscious experience, although the nerves might be functioning normally. In other words, anesthetics